This year, 2026, will be a year of great upheavals. As I mentioned in the last video, we're facing a particularly severe drought this year. This drought has made me completely change the technical setup of my garden watering system, but more importantly, it has deeply changed the way I think about how a garden should be watered. So in this video, first we'll look at my situation, how things are set up here, so you can see if what I've done here might be something you could do at home. I'll explain in detail how I set up and distributed my drip irrigation, and especially how I automated my watering system, since that's what's changed the most this year. And then at the end of the video, we'll see why this year it seems like I've completely changed my approach. Up until now, I recommended gardens with almost no watering, but today, in certain areas, and at least during this period, I'm watering my garden almost every day. Alright, let's get started with this video. So first, a quick overview of the context about the different water and electricity resources we have. We're on an uncultivated plot of land that we're gradually turning into farmland. On this land, there's a well that provides water as much as we want for most of the year, except for one summer. I don't have much experience with this land, but anyway, last year the well provided as much water as we wanted until about, let's say, August. And in August or August-September, it gave about 1 cubic meter per day. That's not a lot, but we make do. But this year, it provided as much water as we wanted until July, mid-July, or the end of June, and then from the end of June or early July, it gave between 1 and 2 cubic meters per day. And now, these last 10 days, it's giving less than 1 cubic meter per day. So it's not necessarily easy to calculate, and it also depends on how and how often we pump from it, but in any case, it's certain that it doesn't provide as much water as we need. We also have municipal water, but since we pay for it, we use it as little as possible. And that's it, we're still setting up, so we don't have the roofs with rainwater collection and tanks yet. And besides that, we have tanks in the garden, but they serve as reserves, not as a resource, and we fill them either with well water preferably, and if we have no choice, sometimes with municipal water. So we pay for the municipal water, so we try to use it as little as possible. That being said, there's something else that will determine which water we use first, and for that I'll need to talk to you a bit about energy. Initially, this land had no electricity. That's why we installed tanks up high in the garden, because at first Carol had a low-pressure irrigation system. That means she would fill them with a pump in the well and a generator to run the pump, and she would fill tanks stored in the garden up high. Then it would send water by gravity into drip systems. It worked well for her small vegetable gardens at first, but with the nursery expanding it wasn't enough, so we had to find another solution. And so now we have electricity thanks to off-grid solar power stations, meaning small power stations with solar panels that go with them. We started with an EcoFlow, and since that wasn't enough, we switched to Anchor Solix to have a slightly more powerful station and also with slightly more powerful panels. But just so you know, I don't do any sponsorships, so if you're interested, I'll let you look into it on your own. So now we have enough electricity to run the pump in the well, pretty much as we want. Now we have another limitation, which is that I'll explain the technical setup to you in detail, namely the drip irrigation on almost the entire garden and sprinklers on all the nursery plants that are in pots for sale, which therefore need to be watered regularly. Then, well, 2 or 3 other little things, but the other thing is that the well is about 50 meters from the garden, the water is at 6 meters, so the pump is at 7 meters deep. As a result, there's flow, but not enough pressure for it to reach all systems. So for all that, we have to use the municipal water, which has enough pressure. The idea isn't to stay like this, it's just that we're still getting set up right now. The long-term plan is to have a large water tank on the surface, like a pool or some other big container, with the well regularly pumping water into this surface tank, which acts as a buffer, and then another pump, maybe a more powerful one in this tank, that will then send water to all the irrigation systems in the garden. So that's something we're going to try to set up soon, so we can really use only well water. So for now, we're still kind of forced to use a lot of water from the main supply, especially this year, because it's really this year that there have been big changes. Originally, we have the different water tanks in the garden, which we use to fill watering cans. By hand, we water at the time of planting, and then we try from time to time to give a little extra watering. That is to say, until now, I recommended watering once every 10 days or during a short dry spell once a week. That was enough, but this year I've completely changed. So the big thing that changed this year is, well, first of all, the installation of drip irrigation. I've always put a few lines of drip irrigation as a precaution in some sensitive areas, but this year I've installed drip irrigation on almost all of the cultivated areas. I'll give a quick tutorial on how I installed the drip irrigation lines. And first of all, you should know that I grouped my drip irrigation lines into 2 different zones, no more than that. So if I turn on one line, it waters half the garden, and if I turn on the other line, it waters the other half. And I did this for a very specific reason, which is that with this setup, I've automated this watering system. That means I have a timer that will run for half an hour on one line and half an hour on the other line, so not at the same time. The idea is that there's enough pressure to do one part and then enough pressure to do the other part. If I do both at the same time, it's not enough. So if I do them in two parts, it's because I set up a timer, and on this timer, there are only two different outputs. So I bought two timers, which gives me 4 lines, one timer that handles the garden and the 2 drip zones, and another timer that does the watering for me. On one side, the pergola with the sprinklers just for the plants I have in pots, and another line for small areas I have in the greenhouse. Maybe I'll show them to you there as well. So there are timers with more zones that aren't too expensive. I bought 2 timers with 2 zones each, which cost me 120 euros each, so it's not cheap. They're really not the cheapest, maybe even the most expensive of this type of timer. You can also install solenoid valves with separate timers, though it's more complex. I admit that I chose the simpler ready-made option here, so it's 120 euros each the timer, but it's still a pretty good quality timer. So just a quick note about automation. You should know that, well, it has different advantages. It means that, well, the watering happens by itself and it frees up that time for me to do other things, because the working hours we have during the day are quite limited due to the heat we get in the afternoon. So yeah, it helps me save time, it helps me be more relaxed, and above all, it allows me, like I said in the last video, to maybe take a few days off and slow down a bit, to take 2 or 3 days off in a pretty relaxed way. On the other hand, automation has a big drawback, which is that there's a risk. So first of all, when you set up the system, my advice is the first few times, and at least the very first time, turn the pressure all the way up on your network, let it run for a while, and check around to see if any connections have come loose, if anything has come undone that could make you lose all your water. And once it holds well, the risk is that one day a part could get clogged, or one day a part could come loose, and that leads to a big waste of water. And usually this kind of incident, you'll only notice it when it's too late, when you see areas that are completely dry because they haven't been watered. And so the big risk is that since it's automatic, we stop paying attention to it, we stop monitoring it, and that's when mistakes happen. So it's automatic, it runs on its own, but I still go every day to check that everything has been watered properly. It takes me 100 times less time than if I had to do the watering myself, but I still take a little time every day to make sure everything has been watered everywhere. I don't necessarily need to check everywhere, you know. Since all my zones are grouped together, I just need to check anywhere. If it's dripped, if it's watered, and logically, if it's dripped in one spot, that means the system is pressurized and there's nowhere that it failed. But if one day I come by and it hasn't dripped, that means something has failed somewhere, so then I'll restart it manually, look for where the leak is and fix it. So after that, the installation itself isn't complicated, you know, I just lay out the drip line. So I only use this hose with the built-in drippers. I only use hoses with drippers, not the kind you have to punch holes in and add tubes to place drippers where needed. Because, well, it's much more complicated to set up, and it's especially very difficult to remove at the end of the season. When hoses are under plants and mulch, pulling them to clean causes them to get caught. I prefer my hose with built-in emitters, which is easy to remove. And then a connector, I basically just need 2 connectors. And T-connectors when I need to split my hose, and the connectors, well, just in line, in an I shape. You could say, I don't know, they're used to connect just 2 hoses, to connect a hose with a dripper to a hose without a dripper. Since I'm going to put a line of drippers on each bed, and then to connect each bed in the areas where I don't need to irrigate, I'll use hose without drippers. So at the end of the line, when there are line ends, you could use plugs, but the risk with plugs is that sometimes they pop off with the pressure. So since I don't need them, and it also saves money, I'll just fold the end over twice with a piece of wire to keep the hose closed, and that's more than enough. At least that way it doesn't pop off. So that's it. I finished my setup here on this bed. I pretty much always do it the same way. I install what I call a manifold, which is the hose without drippers. It's just a hose that serves to supply water, but it's the same size as the drip hoses. It's the hose that I'll use to connect all the drip lines where I don't need it to drip. So I have the manifold running along all my beds, and then with a T-connector each time, at the end of the bed, I'll connect my drip line. And here is the inlet where the water will come in, and what you'll need to figure out each time. It depends on how you supply it. But anyway, for me, everywhere in my garden, I come in with a garden hose like this with quick connectors. And you'll need to find what you need to connect that to this kind of hose here. So for that, I found 2 different systems. On one hand, it's the little adapter that you usually put on faucets, the ones you screw on. And there's this kind of connector that goes with the drip hoses. So these aren't my favorite systems, but well, it still works, so this connects. Here you slide it onto the end of the dripper, then you close it here, and this you screw it on. So on the connector system, and now you just have to connect it and you're good to go. Or, well, even simpler than these connectors is just the adapter, same thing that you slide on here with the thread directly on it. And the thread, well, which will fit to the adapter that goes on the faucets, and there you go, it connects directly. I prefer this type of connector because if it pops off due to the pressure, you can always add a little wire here to tighten it properly. I don't know if you noticed, but I always push my connectors in as hard as I can. I never heat it with a flame. Or there's another technique, which is to dip it in hot water. You make a little pot of boiling water in a pan, you dip the pipe in it, it softens it. But I feel like the more you try to soften the pipe to fit it on, the more, in the end, well, it spreads out a little, it gets a bit wider and it pops off more easily. And that's when you have to add wire everywhere to tighten it. So I really try to force it on, but without heating it up more than that, you know. There you go, it's in, connected, and just needs to be plugged in. And test it. It seems to hold, but it's leaking like crazy. It must not be tightened all the way. Now, the way I installed the drip system, I did it in a pretty unique way, and I'll explain why I did it like that. You should know that often, for drip systems, we put 2 or even 3 lines per bed. If we have 2 or 3 rows of crops, we put 1 drip line per row. I didn't do it that way. I placed 1 drip line in the center of each bed. And let me know in the comments what you think about it, but my idea with drip lines on the crop beds isn't necessarily to irrigate the crops on the surface or to moisten the soil on top. It's mainly so that the soil stays moist deeper down. Like I was saying, I often recommend watering very infrequently, just to restore a bit of moisture deep down, but I encourage my plants to root deeply. Except that this year, the soil is so dry, especially deep down, that deep rooting of the plants is completely useless since there's no water. So for me, the idea of drip irrigation is just to keep the soil moist deep down. And to keep it moist on the surface, well, I stick to my old method. I'm going to use a sprinkler with water from the well, so I'll moisten the surface. As I always say, for me, every 6, 8, 10 days, I don't need to do more than that, but because it's dry deep down, well, this year that doesn't work anymore with just that watering. So a drip line in the middle of each bed that I run for about half an hour every day. It's not a lot, but it's enough to keep it moist at a medium depth in the soil. It's not enough to go really deep, but it's enough for the plants to survive fairly well. And now let's see how I use all of this. Like I was saying before, I used to recommend watering as little as possible, and once a week or once every 2 days was enough. Today I've totally changed my approach. The drip irrigation systems I have in different areas of the garden, at this time of year, they're really running every day, half an hour per day on each area, so that's a total of 1 hour per day. So it's like every day I have the tap open for an hour plus another half hour for the pergola with the potted plants, so that's still a lot of watering. And that also means that at the end of the year it's going to cost us a certain amount as well. You should know that most of what's in the garden is being grown for the nursery, so our business depends on it, so we can't just stop like that. And then on the side we also have food production for ourselves. So we have 1 hour per day with the drip irrigation running very early in the morning usually. And you should know that these are really the drip lines that are in the center of the bed. They don't really water the crops, they just moisten the soil deeply, which helps the plants hold on a little bit. And besides that, I'll have the well water that goes to a sprinkler, which I'll move to different areas. Every day, we'll put it in a different spot and try to rotate so that each area gets surface watering at least once every 6 to 8 days. So I really make a distinction between deeply moistening the soil so the plants can withstand and using the sprinkler to moisten and cool the surface areas for soil life and to keep the plants fresh. And I admit that with the heat waves we're having, it's not always enough, but the plants still survive. We still have pretty good yields despite the weather we're having, so we make do. Alright, that's it for the overall presentation. So let me know in the comments if this was maybe a bit messy, if you have any more specific questions about the setup, and maybe I'll make a less general and more detailed video about the drip system or other things, so let me know. And well, there you go, I hope this was helpful for you. If that's the case, give it a thumbs up, it would make me happy. Share the video with people around you, subscribe if you don't want to miss upcoming videos. All of that makes me happy. If you'd like to support me financially, that's great. I'll add some Tipeee links here in the description or at the end of the video. And thank you so much to everyone who does it, who will do it, without whom I wouldn't be able to take the time to do all this. Thanks everyone, see you soon. Bye.